The descent down Eagles Peak's north face in blizzard conditions was unlike anything Brennan had experienced in his 15-year career. Snow swirled around them in blinding sheets, making it impossible to see more than a few feet in any direction. Wind gusts of 50 miles per hour buffeted them against the granite face, threatening to spin their rappelling system out of control. "I can't see anything," Carlos shouted over the howling wind, his voice barely audible despite being secured just inches from Brennan's position. "That's normal in these conditions," Brennan replied, focusing intently on maintaining their descent speed and direction. "I'm navigating by feel and by counting rope length. We're making good progress." Every 50 feet of descent, Brennan paused to check their position against the granite landmarks he had memorized during their ascent. The rock formations provided reference points that remained constant even when visibility was zero. His hands, despite heavy gloves, were becoming numb from the cold, making it increasingly difficult to maintain precise control of the rappelling equipment. Above them, Patterson was following on a separate rope system, carrying the technical equipment and monitoring their progress through radio communications. The storm had intensified to the point where he could barely see Brennan and Carlos, even though they were only 30 feet below his position. "Mike, how's your descent going?" Brennan's voice crackled through the radio, distorted by wind interference. "Rope is icing up, making equipment control difficult. But I'm maintaining descent speed." "How's Carlos holding up?" Brennan glanced at the boy secured to his harness. Carlos's face was pale with cold and fear, but he was following instructions and hadn't panicked despite the terrifying conditions. "He's doing better than expected. Kid's got courage." The praise meant everything to Carlos, who was fighting not just physical challenges, but also the psychological terror of descending a vertical cliff face in the middle of a blizzard. Every gust of wind felt like it might tear him loose from the safety systems, and the swirling snow created a disorienting sensory experience that challenged his ability to maintain rational thought. "How much farther?" Carlos asked, his words slurred from cold and exhaustion. Brennan checked his rope length calculations. "About 300 feet to go. We're halfway there." But as they continued their descent, Brennan encountered a problem he hadn't anticipated. The granite face was becoming increasingly smooth, offering fewer natural features that could provide protection from the wind. In several sections, they were rappelling down completely vertical surfaces with no handholds or ledges that could provide temporary shelter from the storm. "Tom, this is base camp." Morrison's voice came through the radio with urgency. "Weather Service is reporting that wind speeds in your area are now exceeding 60 miles per hour. Those are hurricane-force conditions. You need to find immediate shelter." Brennan understood the implications. Wind speeds above 60 miles per hour made controlled rappelling nearly impossible. Their ropes could be blown sideways against sharp rock edges, potentially causing equipment failure. Worse, the human body couldn't maintain fine motor control in such extreme conditions. "Base camp, we're committed to the descent. There's no way to establish shelter on a vertical rock face. We have to continue down." "Understood, Rescue 1. Dr. Rodriguez wants you to know that she has warming equipment and medical supplies ready for immediate treatment when you reach the bottom." At 400 feet into their descent, disaster nearly struck. A particularly violent wind gust caught their rappelling system and slammed both Brennan and Carlos against the granite face with tremendous force. Carlos cried out in pain as his injured leg struck the rock, and Brennan felt something give way in his left shoulder. "Are you hurt?" Brennan asked Carlos immediately. "My leg feels like it's broken again, but I'm okay. What about you?" Brennan tested his left arm and realized he had probably suffered a minor shoulder separation. The injury was painful but not debilitating, and he could still maintain control of the rappelling equipment with his right arm. "I'm functional. We keep going." Above them, Patterson had witnessed the impact and was dealing with his own challenges. Ice was forming on his rope from the combination of snow and his own body heat, making the descent increasingly treacherous. Several times, his rappelling device had jammed due to ice buildup, forcing him to stop and clear the equipment before continuing. "Tom, Mike, this is base camp. We can see headlamp lights about 200 feet up the mountain face. Are those your positions?" Patterson looked down through the swirling snow and could barely make out the glow of vehicle headlights at the base camp. They were closer to safety than he had realized. Affirmative, base camp. We can see your lights too. Estimate 10 more minutes to reach the bottom. But those final 10 minutes would prove to be the most challenging part of the entire rescue operation. As they descended below the protection of the upper rock formations, they became exposed to the full force of the storm system. Wind speeds increased dramatically, and the temperature dropped well below zero when accounting for wind chill effects. Carlos was showing severe signs of hypothermia despite all their efforts to keep him warm. His speech became increasingly slurred, and Brennan could feel the boy's grip on the harness system beginning to weaken. "Carlos, I need you to stay alert and keep talking to me. Tell me about your band. What songs do you play?" We play mostly cover songs. Stuff by Green Day and I can't remember the names." Carlos's confusion was a clear sign that hypothermia was affecting his cognitive functions. Brennan increased their descent speed slightly, accepting higher risks in order to get Carlos to medical treatment as quickly as possible. The boy's core body temperature was dropping to life-threatening levels, and every additional minute of exposure increased the risk of permanent damage or death. "Base camp, this is Tom. Carlos is showing signs of severe hypothermia. We need medical intervention immediately upon reaching the bottom." Dr. Rodriguez's voice came through the radio. "Understood. I have a warming station set up in one of the vehicles with heated blankets and warm intravenous fluids. How far out are you?" "Maybe 5 more minutes." Those 5 minutes felt like hours as Brennan fought to maintain control of their descent in conditions that were beyond the limits of safe rappelling operations. His hands were so numb he could barely feel the rappelling equipment, and he was navigating primarily by instinct and experience rather than conscious control. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Brennan felt his feet touch solid ground. They had reached the base of Eagles Peak's north face, completing a descent that many experts would have considered impossible under such extreme weather conditions. "Carlos, we made it. You're safe now." The boy was barely conscious, his body temperature dangerously low and his injured leg requiring immediate medical attention. Patterson reached the bottom 2 minutes later, also suffering from cold exposure, but in much better condition than Carlos. Dr. Rodriguez and Morrison rushed to meet them with emergency medical equipment and warming supplies. Carlos was immediately wrapped in heated blankets and given warm intravenous fluids to begin raising his core body temperature. "How is he?" David Martinez asked frantically as the medical team worked on his son. "He's alive, and that's what matters most right now," Dr. Rodriguez replied while checking Carlos's vital signs. "He's suffering from moderate to severe hypothermia and has injuries to his left leg, but I believe he's going to make a full recovery." As Carlos was loaded into an ambulance for transport to the regional medical center, the full magnitude of what had just been accomplished began to sink in for everyone involved. They had successfully extracted a victim from one of the most dangerous rescue environments in the region, under weather conditions that should have made the operation impossible. Captain Chin arrived at the scene just as the ambulance was preparing to depart. "How did you manage to pull this off?" Eagles Peak's north face was supposed to be unsurvivable for rescue operations. Patterson, exhausted but grinning despite his fatigue, looked back up at the mountain face they had just descended. In the swirling snow and darkness, it was impossible to see the granite cliffs that had nearly claimed multiple lives. Sometimes impossible is just another word for something that hasn't been tried with the right combination of determination, skill, and luck. Brennan, nursing his injured shoulder, added, "and having a victim who refused to give up." Carlos showed more courage in those caves than most adults would have in the same situation. The rescue operation had taken 14 hours from the initial emergency call to Carlos's successful evacuation from the mountain. During that time, temperatures had dropped to minus 15 degrees Fahrenheit, wind speeds had exceeded 60 miles per hour, and visibility had been reduced to zero for extended periods. 3 weeks later, Carlos Martinez was released from the hospital with a fully healed leg fracture and no permanent effects from his hypothermia. The rescue operation was reviewed by mountain rescue organizations throughout the region and became a case study in unconventional rescue techniques. The Martinez family established a scholarship fund for wilderness safety education, ensuring that other young people would learn about mountain hazards and proper safety procedures before venturing into dangerous terrain. Patterson, Brennan, Dr. Rodriguez, Morrison, and Captain Chin all received commendations for their roles in the rescue operation. More importantly, they had proven that even the most challenging rescue scenarios could be successfully resolved with proper planning, technical skill, and unwavering determination. Eagles Peak's north face was no longer considered completely unsurvivable for rescue operations, though it remained one of the most dangerous rescue environments in the region. The techniques developed during Carlos's rescue became standard protocols for similar operations throughout the Rocky Mountain region. 6 months after the rescue, Carlos Martinez returned to Eagles Peak with his family, Patterson, and Brennan. They hiked to the base of the north face where the rescue had taken place, not to attempt any climbing, but to reflect on the events that had changed all their lives. "I learned something important that day," Carlos said, looking up at the imposing granite faces. "Mountains don't care about your plans or your schedule. They have their own rules, and you have to respect them or they'll kill you." Patterson nodded in agreement. "But I also learned that human determination and teamwork can overcome challenges that seem impossible. When people refuse to give up on each other, amazing things can happen." Brennan, his shoulder fully healed, added his own perspective. "The most important lesson is that every life has value worth fighting for. Carlos's family never stopped believing we could bring him home safely, and that faith gave us the strength to attempt something that violated every safety protocol we had been taught." As they stood together at the base of Eagles Peak, watching the afternoon sunlight illuminate the granite faces that had nearly claimed Carlos's life, they understood that they had shared an experience that would connect them forever. They had faced the impossible and emerged victorious, proving that sometimes the most meaningful achievements come from refusing to accept defeat when someone's life hangs in the balance. The mountain remained as dangerous and imposing as ever, its granite faces scarred by centuries of harsh weather and geological forces. But it no longer held the same terror for any of them. They had entered its most dangerous realm and emerged alive, carrying with them the knowledge that human courage and determination could overcome even the most intimidating natural obstacles. Carlos Martinez went on to study geology in college, inspired by his experience to understand the natural forces that had nearly killed him. He became an advocate for wilderness safety education and eventually joined a mountain rescue organization himself, using his unique perspective to help train other rescuers. The abandoned mining road that had provided access to Eagles Peak was eventually improved and maintained by local authorities, creating a safer route for future rescue operations. A memorial plaque was installed at the Silver Bell mine site, honoring both the miners who had died there decades earlier and the rescue operation that had saved Carlos's life. Eagles Peak remained a challenging and dangerous mountain, but it was no longer considered impossible to conquer. The rescue operation had proven that with proper planning, technical expertise, and unwavering determination, even the most daunting challenges could be overcome. The story of Carlos Martinez's rescue spread throughout the mountain rescue community, inspiring other teams to reconsider their approaches to seemingly impossible rescue scenarios. It became a reminder that the limits of what could be accomplished were often defined more by imagination and determination than by technical constraints or environmental conditions. Most importantly, it demonstrated that every human life possessed value worth fighting for, regardless of the risks involved or the odds of success. In a world where people often gave up too easily when faced with difficult challenges, the rescue on Eagles Peak stood as proof that persistence and courage could achieve the impossible when motivated by the simple desire to bring someone home safely to their family. The journey out of Devil's Throat would prove to be the most physically and mentally demanding challenge any of them had ever faced. Patterson positioned himself behind Carlos, ready to guide and support him through the narrow granite passage. The boy's injured leg made normal crawling impossible, so they developed a technique where Carlos used his arms and one good leg to pull himself forward while Patterson pushed from behind. "Take your time," Patterson encouraged as Carlos struggled with the first few feet of the ascent. We're not in a race. Steady progress is better than wearing yourself out. The granite walls seemed to press in around them as they moved deeper into the passage. Carlos's breathing became labored from the physical exertion and the confined space. Several times, he had to stop to rest and overcome waves of claustrophobic panic. "I don't think I can do this," Carlos whispered after they had traveled only 15 feet. "It's too tight, and my leg hurts so bad." Patterson could hear the edge of hysteria creeping into the boy's voice. Panic in a confined space could be fatal, leading to hyperventilation and complete paralysis of decision-making ability. "Carlos, look at me." Patterson positioned his headlamp so Carlos could see his face clearly. "I know this is terrifying. I've been in situations like this before, and I'm scared too. But fear is just information telling us to be careful. It doesn't mean we can't succeed. What if we get stuck? What if the passage gets too narrow? Then we'll back up and find another way. But right now, this passage is our best option, and we've already proven we can make progress. Let's take it 1 foot at a time." They resumed their difficult ascent, with Patterson continuously monitoring Carlos for signs of shock, hypothermia, or complete physical exhaustion. The boy was running on pure adrenaline and willpower, pushing his body beyond normal limits. Above them, Brennan was dealing with his own set of challenges. The weather had deteriorated to the point where snow was falling steadily, and wind gusts were approaching dangerous levels for anyone exposed on the mountain face. He had established radio contact with the base camp and learned that weather conditions were expected to worsen dramatically over the next few hours. "Base camp, this is Tom. Patterson and Carlos are inside Devil's Throat working their way toward the surface, but progress is extremely slow due to the victim's injuries. What's the latest weather forecast?" Jake Morrison's voice came through the radio with urgency. "Tom, you need to know that the National Weather Service has issued a blizzard warning for your area. Wind speeds are expected to reach 60 miles per hour with heavy snow accumulation. You have maybe 2 hours before conditions become unsurvivable for anyone exposed on the mountain." Brennan looked out at the swirling snow and realized that their window for a successful rescue was rapidly closing. If they didn't get Carlos out of the cave system and off the mountain within the next 2 hours, they would all be trapped until the storm passed, which could be several days. He activated his radio to communicate with Patterson inside the cave. "Mike, we've got a serious problem. Weather is deteriorating faster than predicted. We need to expedite the extraction." Patterson's voice came back weak and distorted by the granite formations. "We're doing everything possible, but Carlos is exhausted and in pain. Pushing him too hard could result in complete collapse." "How much progress have you made?" "Maybe 25 feet. We're about halfway to the entrance." Brennan calculated the time required. At their current rate of progress, it would take another hour to reach the cave entrance, plus additional time to extract Carlos from the mountain and get him to safety. They were cutting it extremely close. Inside the cave, Patterson was dealing with an increasingly difficult situation. Carlos's injured leg was swelling, making movement more painful with each passing minute. The boy's energy reserves were nearly exhausted, and he was beginning to show signs of severe hypothermia despite the chemical heat packs. "I need to rest," Carlos said, collapsing against the granite wall. "I can't feel my fingers anymore, and my vision is getting blurry." Patterson recognized the symptoms of advanced hypothermia. Carlos's core body temperature was dropping to dangerous levels, and his body was shutting down non-essential functions to preserve vital organs. They were running out of time. "Carlos, I know you're tired, but I need you to understand something. There's a big storm coming, and if we don't get out of here soon, we're all going to be trapped until it passes. Your parents are waiting for you, and they need to know you're safe. I'm trying, but I just can't move anymore." Patterson made a decision that violated every safety protocol for cave rescue operations. "Carlos, I'm going to help you in a way that's going to seem scary, but I need you to trust me completely." He positioned himself in front of Carlos and backed into the ascending passage. "I want you to grab onto my belt and hold on tight. I'm going to pull you through the rest of this passage. All you have to do is hold on and try not to panic. What if you get tired? What if you can't pull both of us? Then we'll rest and try again. But right now, this is our best chance to get you out of here alive." Carlos grabbed onto Patterson's climbing belt, and they began a modified ascent with Patterson essentially dragging the injured boy through the granite passage. The physical demands were enormous, requiring Patterson to pull not only his own weight, but also Carlos's weight up the angled rock surface while maintaining enough control to avoid injury to either of them. The passage seemed endless. Patterson's shoulders and back burned with exertion, and his breathing became ragged from the combination of physical effort and limited oxygen in the confined space. Several times, he had to stop to rest, but each pause allowed cold air to penetrate their shared body heat, making hypothermia worse for both of them. "I can see light ahead," Carlos called out suddenly. "There's light coming from up ahead." Patterson looked up and saw the faint glow of Brennan's headlamp filtering down through the passage. They were approaching the cave entrance, but the final 20 feet would be the most technically challenging because the passage became nearly vertical. "Tom," Patterson called out through the rock formations. "We're almost to the entrance, but I'm going to need help pulling Carlos up the final section. The angle is too steep for him to climb with his injured leg." Brennan's voice echoed down from above. "I'm setting up a haul system now. When you reach the bottom of the vertical section, attach this rope to Carlos, and I'll pull him up." A climbing rope dropped down into the passage, and Patterson carefully secured it around Carlos's chest and under his arms. "This is going to be uncomfortable, but it's the safest way to get you up that vertical section. Try to use your good leg to help guide yourself, but don't worry if you can't. The rope system will do most of the work." Carlos looked up at the nearly vertical granite wall and swallowed hard. "What happens if the rope breaks?" "It won't. This rope is rated for over 9,000 pounds of force, and you weigh maybe 150 pounds. You're going to be fine." Brennan began pulling from above, and Carlos slowly ascended the vertical section of Devil's Throat. The process took 15 minutes of careful coordination between all three men, with Patterson guiding Carlos from below and Brennan controlling the haul system from above. When Carlos finally emerged from the cave entrance onto the narrow ledge where Brennan was positioned, both rescue team members felt a moment of profound relief. They had successfully extracted the boy from what many experts considered an unsurvivable situation. But their celebration was short-lived. The weather conditions on the mountain face had deteriorated dramatically while they were inside the cave. Snow was falling heavily, and wind gusts were strong enough to threaten their stability on the exposed ledge. "We need to get off this mountain immediately," Brennan said, helping Carlos into warm clothing and emergency shelter gear. "Visibility is dropping, and these wind conditions make rappelling extremely dangerous." Patterson emerged from Devil's Throat a few minutes later, exhausted but determined to complete the rescue operation. "How do we get Carlos down 600 feet of technical rappelling in these weather conditions? He doesn't have the strength or experience for that kind of descent." Brennan had been considering the same problem. "We're going to have to use a tandem rappelling technique. One of us rappels with Carlos secured to our harness system. It's risky, but it's our only option." "I'll take him down," Patterson volunteered. "I have more experience with tandem operations." "Mike, you're exhausted from the cave extraction. I'm in better physical condition right now to handle a technical descent with an injured person." They quickly rigged Carlos into a specialized harness system that would allow him to be securely attached to Brennan during the rappelling descent. The process was complicated by the boy's injured leg and the deteriorating weather conditions, but both rescue team members had trained extensively for exactly these kinds of emergency situations. "Carlos, this is going to be the longest and most frightening 15 minutes of your life," Brennan explained as he made final adjustments to the harness system. "We're going to descend 600 feet down a vertical rock face in the middle of a snowstorm. I need you to trust me completely and follow every instruction I give you." Carlos, wrapped in emergency clothing and still suffering from hypothermia, looked down at the mountain face disappearing into swirling snow. "I can't see the bottom. How do you know where we're going?" "I don't navigate by sight in these conditions. I use compass bearings, rope length measurements, and memorized landmarks to find our way down. We've planned this descent route, and I know exactly where we need to go." Patterson would follow them down using a separate rope system, carrying all the technical equipment, and maintaining radio contact with the base camp. If something went wrong during the tandem descent, he would need to be in position to provide immediate assistance. Base camp, this is Rescue 1. Patterson radioed to Morrison. We have successfully extracted Carlos from the cave system. Beginning rappel descent now in deteriorating weather conditions. Estimate 20 minutes to reach safe ground. Roger, Rescue 1. Be advised that weather conditions at base camp are also deteriorating rapidly. Dr. Rodriguez has medical equipment ready for immediate treatment of hypothermia and trauma injuries. Brennan approached the edge of the north face with Carlos secured to his harness. The wind was gusting strong enough to push them sideways against the rock face, adding an element of unpredictability to what was already an extremely technical operation. Carlos, when we go over the edge, I want you to keep your legs slightly bent and let me control our descent speed. Don't try to help or guide our movement. Just hold on tight and trust the equipment. I'm ready, Carlos said, though his voice betrayed the fear he was struggling to control. They went over the edge together, beginning a descent through swirling snow and wind that would test every skill Brennan had acquired in 15 years of mountain rescue operations. Below them, the granite face of Eagle's Peak disappeared into white oblivion, offering no visual reference points to guide their way. The rescue operation had reached its most critical phase, with 3 lives hanging in the balance, and weather conditions that were rapidly becoming unsurvivable for anyone exposed on the mountain. Patterson secured his position at the entrance to Devil's Throat and called down into the darkness again. Carlos, this is Mike Patterson with Mountain Rescue. I need you to stay calm and answer some questions so I can help you. The response came back weak and echoing, distorted by the acoustic properties of the rock formations surrounding the boy. I'm hurt. My leg is stuck under some rocks. I've been trying to get out for hours, but I can't move. Patterson felt his heart sink. A trapped leg complicated everything, transforming this from a simple extraction into a technical rescue requiring specialized equipment they didn't have with them. He activated his headlamp and peered into the crevice, trying to assess the internal structure of the cave system. Devil's Throat angled downward at approximately 45 degrees for the first 30 feet, then appeared to level off into a horizontal chamber. The walls were smooth granite, worn by centuries of water flow during spring snowmelt. There were no obvious handholds or anchor points for climbing equipment, making descent and ascent extremely challenging. Tom, Patterson called up to Brennan, who was still anchored on the summit. I need you down here. Carlos is trapped deeper in the system than we anticipated, and he's got injuries. While waiting for Brennan to rappel down to his position, Patterson continued gathering information from Carlos. Can you tell me exactly where you're hurt? Besides your leg, do you have any other injuries? My head hurts really bad. I think I hit it when I fell. And I'm so cold. I can't stop shivering. Head injury combined with hypothermia created a medical emergency that couldn't wait for ideal rescue conditions. Patterson knew that every minute they delayed increased the risk of permanent brain damage or death. Brennan arrived at Patterson's position 12 minutes later, breathing heavily from the technical climbing required to reach the crevice entrance. What's the situation? Carlos is trapped approximately 60 feet inside the cave system. Injured leg, possible head trauma, advanced hypothermia symptoms. We need to get him out immediately. Brennan examined the crevice opening with his own headlamp, assessing the technical challenges they faced. This is going to require cave rescue techniques. The angle of descent means we can't use standard rappelling methods. We'll have to belly crawl most of the way. Can we safely extract an injured person through that? Not easily. If his leg is truly trapped under rocks, we may need to excavate around him before attempting to move him. That could take hours we don't have. Patterson made a decision that went against every standard safety protocol he had learned in 23 years of rescue operations. I'm going in alone to assess his condition and see what we're dealing with. You maintain anchor position here and be ready to assist with extraction. Mike, that's suicide. If you get trapped in there too, we'll have 2 victims instead of 1. Standard protocol calls for. Standard protocol doesn't cover this situation, Patterson interrupted. That boy is dying while we discuss safety procedures. I'm going in. Before Brennan could object further, Patterson had removed his climbing harness and begun crawling into Devil's Throat. The confined space immediately triggered claustrophobic sensations as the granite walls pressed in around him from all sides. His headlamp provided a narrow cone of light that revealed smooth rock surfaces worn by water flow. The descent was more difficult than he had anticipated. The smooth granite provided little traction, and several times he had to brace himself with his knees and elbows to prevent sliding too rapidly. The angle was steep enough that controlling his descent required constant physical effort. "Carlos, I'm coming to you. Keep talking to me so I can follow your voice. I'm here. Please hurry. I'm getting really scared." The sound of genuine terror in the boy's voice motivated Patterson to move faster despite the risks. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 10 minutes, the crevice began to level off into a more horizontal orientation. Patterson's headlamp suddenly illuminated a larger space ahead. He emerged into a chamber approximately 20 feet wide and 8 feet high, with a floor covered in loose rocks and debris that had accumulated over decades of geological activity. And there, huddled against the far wall, was Carlos Martinez. The 17-year-old boy was in worse condition than Patterson had feared. His left leg was pinned under a granite boulder that probably weighed several hundred pounds. His face was pale and drawn, with visible signs of shock and hypothermia. A nasty gash across his forehead had bled significantly before clotting, leaving dried blood streaked down the side of his face. "Carlos, I'm Mike Patterson with Mountain Rescue. I'm here to get you out of here, but I need you to help me by staying calm and following my instructions." Carlos's eyes were wide with a mixture of relief and continued fear. "I thought I was going to die in here. I've been trapped since early this morning, and it just kept getting colder and darker." Patterson approached the boulder pinning Carlos's leg and immediately realized the magnitude of the problem. The rock was wedged between two other large stones in a way that made it impossible to move without specialized leverage equipment. Worse, Carlos's leg appeared to be trapped not just under the weight of the boulder, but in a narrow gap between rocks where his foot had become twisted. "Can you feel your foot? Can you wiggle your toes?" Carlos concentrated for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, but it hurts really bad. I think something might be broken." Patterson pulled out a compact medical kit and began treating Carlos's head wound. The cut was superficial but had bled significantly, contributing to his weakened condition. More importantly, Patterson could see signs that Carlos was experiencing moderate to severe hypothermia, slurred speech, uncontrollable shivering, and confusion about how long he had been trapped. "Carlos, I need you to listen carefully. I'm going to give you some emergency heat packs and get you warmed up. Then, I have to figure out how to free your leg. This might take some time, but I promise you that we're going to get you out of here." "My parents must be so worried. Are they okay?" "Your parents are fine. They're the ones who called for help, and they're waiting for us at the campground. Your dad has been calling to you every few minutes to make sure you're okay." Patterson activated several chemical heat packs and placed them against Carlos's torso, helping to raise his core body temperature. He also wrapped the boy in an emergency thermal blanket designed to reflect body heat back to the user. While Carlos warmed up, Patterson examined the rock formation, trapping his leg more carefully. The boulder had apparently fallen from higher up in the chamber during a recent rock slide, possibly triggered by Carlos's own movements when he first fell into the crevice. His leg was twisted in such a way that simply lifting the boulder wouldn't be enough. They would need to carefully maneuver both the rock and Carlos's leg simultaneously to free him without causing additional injury. "I'm going to radio back to my partner and get some equipment down here to help move this rock," Patterson explained. "Are you feeling warmer now?" "Yes, much better. Thank you." Patterson activated his handheld radio, hoping the signal would carry through the rock formations to reach Brennan at the crevice entrance. "Tom, this is Mike. Do you copy?" Brennan's voice crackled through the radio with significant static interference. "Mike, I've been trying to reach you for 20 minutes. What's your status?" "I've found Carlos. He's conscious and coherent, but his leg is pinned under a large boulder. I'm going to need the portable winch and cable system. Can you get that equipment down here?" There was a long pause before Brennan responded. "Mike, we didn't bring the portable winch. That equipment is back at headquarters." Patterson felt a cold realization wash over him. They were trapped 60 feet inside a mountain cave with an injured boy, no way to move the boulder pinning his leg, and no immediate way to request additional equipment. The weather outside was deteriorating, making helicopter support impossible and cutting off their access to additional rescue resources. Tom, what other options do we have? Can you think of any way to create mechanical advantage for moving heavy rocks? Give me a few minutes to think. In the meantime, you need to know that weather conditions up here are getting dangerous. Wind speeds are approaching 40 miles per hour, and I can see snow starting to fall. Patterson looked at Carlos, who was listening to every word of the radio conversation. The boy was smart enough to understand that their situation had become much more complicated than anyone had anticipated. Are we going to be okay? Carlos asked quietly. Patterson had never lied to a victim during a rescue operation, and he wasn't about to start now. Carlos, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. We're facing some challenges that we didn't expect, but I want you to know that I've been doing mountain rescue for over 20 years, and I've never left someone behind. We're going to find a way to get you out of here. What if you can't move the rock? Then we'll find another way. Maybe we can dig around your leg to create more space. Maybe we can figure out how to break the rock into smaller pieces. There are always options. We just have to be creative and persistent. Patterson's radio crackled again. Mike, I think I have an idea. What if we use the climbing ropes to create a pulley system? If I can anchor the ropes to solid rock formations up here and run them down through the crevice, we might be able to create enough mechanical advantage to move that boulder. That could work, but you'll need multiple anchor points to distribute the load. And we'll need some way to redirect the pull angle so the force is applied in the right direction. I'm working on it. Give me 30 minutes to set up the system. While Brennan worked on establishing a rope and pulley system from outside the cave, Patterson continued treating Carlos's injuries and hypothermia. The chemical heat packs were helping, but the boy was still shivering uncontrollably. More concerning, Carlos was beginning to show signs of confusion and disorientation that indicated his hypothermia was progressing despite their warming efforts. Tell me about your family, Patterson said, trying to keep Carlos alert and focused. What do you like to do when you're not exploring mountains? I play guitar. I'm in a band at school with my friends. We're not very good, but it's fun. Carlos's words were becoming increasingly slurred, a sign that his condition was deteriorating. What kind of music does your band play? Rock music mostly. Some country. My dad taught me to play guitar when I was younger. He's really good. Patterson continued the conversation while examining the boulder more closely. There had to be some way to move it or create enough space for Carlos to free his leg. The rock was wedged between two other large stones, but Patterson noticed that it appeared to be balanced on a smaller stone that acted as a fulcrum point. Carlos, I need you to stay awake and keep talking to me. Can you tell me what happened when you fell into this chamber? I was exploring up on the rocks, and I heard water dripping. I thought maybe there was a hidden waterfall or something cool to see. When I got close to the edge, some rocks broke away, and I fell. I landed on my back, and then more rocks came down on top of me. That explanation confirmed Patterson's assessment. Carlos had triggered a small rock slide when he disturbed loose rocks near the crevice entrance. The boulder pinning his leg had probably been balanced precariously for years before finally falling during the disturbance caused by his accident. Mike, this is Tom. I've got the pulley system set up. I'm running 400 feet of rope down through the crevice now. When it reaches you, attach it to the boulder, and I'll try to generate enough pull to move it. Minutes later, Patterson heard the sound of rope sliding along the granite walls as Brennan lowered the rescue line into the chamber. When the end reached him, he carefully wrapped it around the boulder in a way that would apply lifting force in the most effective direction. Rope is secured, he radioed back to Brennan. But before you start pulling, I need to be ready to help guide Carlos's leg out of the gap. This has to be coordinated perfectly, or we could cause additional injury. Understood. On my count. 3, 2, 1, pulling now. The rope went taut, and Patterson could see the boulder shift slightly. It wasn't moving far, but the small amount of motion created just enough space for Carlos to begin working his leg free. It's working, Carlos said excitedly. I can feel my foot starting to come loose. Patterson guided Carlos's leg carefully as Brennan continued applying tension to the rope system. Gradually, Over a period of several minutes, they were able to extract the boy's leg from the rock trap without causing additional trauma. Leg is free. Patterson radioed to Brennan. Carlos is mobile, and we're ready to begin extraction from the chamber. But, as they prepared to leave the chamber, Patterson realized that their most difficult challenge still lay ahead, getting an injured and hypothermic 17-year-old boy through 60 feet of narrow, angled granite passages to reach safety on the surface. Carlos tried to stand but immediately collapsed, his injured leg unable to support his weight. I don't think I can walk. Patterson had expected this possibility. That's okay. We're going to help you. But I need you to understand that getting out of here is going to be physically demanding. You're going to have to crawl through some tight spaces, and it's going to hurt. Can you do that? Carlos looked toward the crevice entrance, where Patterson's headlamp beam disappeared into the granite passage. Do I have a choice? There's always a choice. But, right now, the only way out is through that passage. Then, let's do it. The old mining road began as little more than two parallel ruts carved into the mountainside, barely visible beneath decades of fallen pine needles and scattered rocks. Patterson shifted the four-wheel drive vehicle into low gear as they climbed steadily away from the main Forest Service road, leaving behind any trace of modern civilization. According to the historical survey maps, this road was built in 1923 to access the Silver Bell mine, Patterson said, consulting a weathered folder of documents while navigating around a fallen tree trunk. The mine operated for only 3 years before a cave-in killed 4 workers, and the company abandoned the operation. Tom Brennan studied the topographical map spread across his lap, correlating their current position with the mountain's terrain features. If this road follows the original survey route, it should take us to approximately 12,400 feet elevation before terminating at the old mine entrance. From there, we'd still have to climb nearly 2,000 feet to reach the summit. But, more importantly, Patterson replied, steering around a washout where decades of spring runoff had carved a deep gully across the road. It should position us directly above the crevice systems where Carlos could be trapped. The vehicle lurched violently as its front wheels dropped into an unseen pothole, sending both men's equipment sliding across the floor. Patterson downshifted further, reducing their speed to barely 5 miles per hour. The road surface was deteriorating rapidly as they gained elevation, and several times they had to stop to clear fallen rocks that blocked their path entirely. "Mike, look at this," Brennan said, pointing to a section of the map marked with red symbols. According to the Geological Survey, there are 3 major crevice systems on the north face. The Widow's Gap at 12,800 feet, Devil's Throat at 12,600 feet, and something called the Lost Chimney at 12,200 feet. Any of those match the direction Carlos's voice was coming from. Brennan pulled out a compass and took a bearing based on their position at the campground. Devil's Throat would be the most likely candidate. It's a vertical shaft that drops approximately 150 feet into the mountain before opening into a series of horizontal chambers. If someone fell into that system, they could easily become disoriented and unable to find their way out. Patterson felt a chill that had nothing to do with the dropping temperature outside their vehicle. A 150-foot vertical drop would likely result in serious injuries, possibly fatal ones. Even if Carlos had somehow survived the fall, extracting him from a complex cave system would require specialized equipment they didn't have with them. The road ahead curved sharply to the right, following the natural contours of the mountain. As they rounded the bend, both men were struck by the dramatic change in scenery. Below them, the forest canopy stretched for miles, a patchwork of green pine trees and golden aspen groves showing their fall colors. Above them, the naked granite faces of Eagle's Peak rose like ancient monuments against the darkening sky. "We're making good time," Patterson observed, checking his watch. "It's been 90 minutes since we left the campground, and we're already above 11,000 feet. Brennan was studying the rock formations visible through the windshield. "The geology changes dramatically at this elevation. See how the granite becomes more fractured? Those stress lines indicate the mountain has experienced significant seismic activity over the centuries. Is that good or bad for our rescue operation?" "Both. The fractures create the crevice systems where someone can become trapped, but they They also provide potential anchor points for rappelling equipment. If we can find stable rock formations, we should be able to establish secure rappel lines. Their conversation was interrupted by a loud grinding sound from beneath the vehicle, followed by a jarring impact that threw both men against their seat belts. Patterson immediately stopped and engaged the parking brake. "Differential guard hit something," he said, opening his door to inspect the damage. "Probably a rock outcrop hidden under those fallen leaves." Brennan joined him outside the vehicle, and they both crawled underneath to assess the situation. The differential guard had struck a granite outcrop that protruded from the road surface like a hidden iceberg. Metal was scraped and dented, but nothing appeared to be leaking fluids. "We can continue, but we need to be more careful," Patterson decided. This road wasn't designed for modern vehicles, and we're probably pushing the limits of what's physically possible. As they continued climbing, the road became increasingly treacherous. Several sections had been completely washed away by decades of erosion, forcing them to navigate around steep drop-offs where a single mistake would send their vehicle tumbling hundreds of feet down the mountainside. The air outside was noticeably thinner, and both men found themselves breathing more deeply despite sitting inside the vehicle. "There," Brennan said suddenly, pointing through the windshield. "I can see structures ahead. That must be the old mine entrance." The Silver Bell mine had clearly been abandoned for decades, but the substantial stone and timber structures built to house the mining operation remained largely intact. A wooden headframe still stood over the main shaft, its timbers weathered gray by decades of exposure to mountain weather. Several outbuildings clustered around the main structure, their roofs partially collapsed but walls still standing. Patterson parked the vehicle near the largest building and turned off the engine. The sudden silence was profound, broken only by the sound of wind whistling through the abandoned structures. "Radio check with base camp," Patterson said, reaching for the communication equipment. Brennan adjusted the radio antenna while Patterson attempted to establish contact with Jake Morrison at the Elk Creek campground. "Base camp, this is Rescue 1. Do you copy?" Morrison's voice crackled through the radio speakers, distorted by static, but clearly audible. "Rescue 1, this is base camp. Reading you loud and clear. What's your status?" "We've reached the Silver Bell mine at approximately 12,400 feet elevation. Vehicle is secure, and we're preparing to begin the climbing phase of the operation. Any updates on Carlos?" "Affirmative. Family has maintained voice contact. His responses are becoming weaker, but he's still conscious and communicating. Dr. Rodriguez estimates we have maybe 4 to 6 hours before hypothermia becomes life-threatening." Patterson and Brennan exchanged glances. 4 to 6 hours wasn't much time for what they were attempting to accomplish. "Understood, base camp. We're beginning our approach to the north face now. Next radio contact in 1 hour." They spent 20 minutes organizing their equipment and checking safety gear. Brennan carried the technical climbing equipment: ropes, anchors, carabiners, and rappelling devices. Patterson carried medical supplies, emergency shelter materials, and communication equipment. Each man wore a climbing harness, helmet, and layered clothing appropriate for the dropping temperatures they would encounter at higher elevations. The hiking trail from the mine to the summit was not officially maintained, but decades of use by hunters and occasional climbers had worn a visible path through the alpine terrain. Above the treeline, the landscape became stark and beautiful, consisting primarily of granite outcroppings, scattered boulders, and hardy alpine plants that survived the harsh growing conditions. "Look at those wind patterns," Brennan observed, pointing to streamers of snow being blown off the mountain's higher peaks. "The weather system Jake mentioned is moving in faster than predicted. We've got maybe 3 hours before conditions become too dangerous for rappelling operations." They climbed steadily for 90 minutes, gaining nearly 1,400 feet in elevation. The physical demands of hiking at high altitude while carrying heavy equipment tested both men's endurance, despite their excellent physical condition. As they approached the summit area, the terrain became increasingly technical, requiring them to use their hands for balance and stability. "There's the north face," Patterson said, approaching the edge of a granite outcrop that provided an unobstructed view of the mountain's most dangerous aspect. The north face of Eagle's Peak was a nearly vertical wall of fractured granite that dropped away into shadowy depths. From their vantage point, they could see the three major crevice systems that Brennan had identified on the topographical maps. Each appeared as a dark gash in the mountain's face, disappearing into shadows that made it impossible to determine their true depth. "Can you see any evidence of where Carlos might be trapped?" Patterson asked, scanning the rock face with binoculars. Brennan studied each crevice system carefully. Devil's Throat looks like the most likely location. It's positioned where his voice would carry to the campground below, and it's wide enough at the top that someone could accidentally fall in while exploring. "How do we reach it?" Brennan was already examining potential anchor points for their rappelling equipment. "We'll need to establish our primary anchor system on this ridge. Then, rappel approximately 600 feet down to the level where Devil's Throat opens onto the face. From there, we can traverse horizontally to reach the crevice entrance." 600 feet is a lot of rappelling. What happens if our ropes aren't long enough? We brought 800 feet of climbing ropes specifically for this possibility. But you're right to be concerned. Once we commit to rappelling, we're committed. If something goes wrong, we won't be able to climb back up these rock faces. Patterson understood the implications. They were essentially betting their own lives that they could reach Carlos and find a way to extract both him and themselves from one of the most dangerous rescue environments in the region. Brennan began setting up the anchor system, carefully selecting granite formations that could support the weight of multiple people and the dynamic forces created during rappelling operations. He placed 3 separate anchors, connecting them with specialized climbing hardware designed to distribute loads evenly across multiple points. "Anchor system complete," he announced after 30 minutes of careful work. "I'm testing each point with twice the expected load. Everything looks solid." Patterson tested the rappelling equipment one final time, checking every carabiner, rope connection, and safety backup system. In technical rescue operations, equipment failure usually meant death, so every component had to be absolutely reliable. "Radio check before we commit," Patterson said, contacting Morrison at base camp. "Base camp, this is Rescue 1. We're in position on the summit and preparing to rappel down the north face. Estimate 40 minutes to reach potential victim location." Morrison's voice came back immediately. "Rescue 1. Be advised that weather conditions are deteriorating rapidly. Wind speeds at your elevation are approaching dangerous levels for rope operations." Both men could feel the increasing wind buffeting their position on the exposed summit. Gusts were now strong enough to affect their balance, and the streamers of snow being blown off nearby peaks had intensified dramatically. "Base camp, we understand the weather risks. But if we don't attempt the rescue now, Carlos won't survive until conditions improve. We're proceeding with the operation." "Acknowledged, Rescue 1. Dr. Rodriguez wants you to know that based on Carlos's voice patterns during recent communications, he's showing advanced signs of hypothermia. Time is critical." Patterson clipped his rappelling device to the rope and approached the edge of the north face. 600 feet below, the granite wall disappeared into shadows where Carlos was trapped, alone and fighting for his life. "Last chance to reconsider this," Brennan said, though his expression made it clear he had no intention of abandoning the rescue attempt. "That boy is counting on us," Patterson replied, beginning his descent into the unknown. "Let's go bring him home." The first 50 feet of rappelling were relatively straightforward, following a nearly vertical granite face with good visibility and stable rock formations. But as Patterson descended further, the character of the mountain changed dramatically. The rock became more fractured and unpredictable, with loose stones that could be dislodged by the slightest contact. "Rockfall," Brennan called from above as several stones broke loose and tumbled past Patterson's position. "Watch your head." Patterson pressed himself against the rock face as the debris rattled past him, highlighting the dangers of their position. On a rescue operation, they not only had to worry about reaching the victims safely, but also about avoiding injury that would make them additional victims requiring rescue themselves. At 200 feet down the face, Patterson reached a narrow ledge that provided a temporary resting point. He anchored himself to the rock face and called up to Brennan. "Ledge system here looks stable. Starting traverse toward Devil's Throat now." The horizontal traverse was more technically challenging than the vertical rappelling. Patterson had to move carefully from handhold to handhold, testing each granite feature before committing his full weight to it. The rock was cold to the touch, and several times handholds that appeared solid crumbled away when he grasped them. "I can see Devil's Throat," he called back to Brennan. "It's bigger than we expected. The opening is at least 8 feet wide, and it appears to angle down into the mountain at about 45 degrees. Any sign of Carlos?" Patterson approached the crevice opening and called into the darkness. "Carlos, can you hear me? This is mountain rescue." For a moment, there was only the sound of wind echoing through the rock formations. Then, from deep within the mountain, came a weak voice. "Help me. I'm down here. I can't get out." The voice was definitely coming from inside Devil's Throat, but it seemed to originate from much deeper within the mountain than Patterson had expected. Carlos had not just fallen into a surface crevice. He was trapped somewhere in the complex cave system that extended into the heart of Eagles Peak. The phone rang at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in October, cutting through the silence of the Rocky Mountain Rescue Service headquarters like a knife through paper. Sergeant Mike Patterson rolled over in his narrow bunk, his weathered hands instinctively reaching for the receiver before his mind fully processed what was happening. 23 years of mountain rescue operations had trained his body to respond before his brain caught up. "Rocky Mountain Rescue, Patterson speaking," he said, his voice rough from sleep but alert. The caller on the other end was breathing heavily, panic evident in every word. "Please, you have to help us. My son, he's trapped on Eagles Peak. He fell into some kind of crevice. We can hear him calling, but we can't reach him. Please, you have to do something." Patterson sat up straighter, instantly awake. Eagles Peak was notorious among local rescue teams. The mountain rose 14,200 feet above sea level, its granite faces scarred by centuries of harsh weather and rock slides. More importantly, it was considered unclimbable by conventional methods on its north face, where most accidents occurred. "Sir, I need you to stay calm and give me details." "What's your name?" "David Martinez. My son Carlos is 17. We were camping at the base camp yesterday, and he went off exploring early this morning. He was supposed to be back by now, but we heard him shouting for help about an hour ago. The sound is coming from somewhere high up on the north face." Patterson grabbed a pen and started taking notes. The north face of Eagles Peak had claimed 3 lives in the past decade, and those were experienced climbers with proper equipment. A 17-year-old boy exploring alone had virtually no chance of survival if he was truly trapped up there. "Mr. Martinez, have you attempted any rescue yourselves?" "We tried, but we can't even see where he is. The rocks are too steep, and it's getting dark. My wife is here with me, and we have 2 other families camping with us, but none of us are experienced climbers. We're just regular people who came up here for a weekend camping trip." Patterson closed his eyes for a moment, running through the possibilities in his mind. Standard rescue protocols for Eagles Peak typically involved helicopter extraction, but the North Face was notorious for creating dangerous wind patterns that made helicopter approaches extremely hazardous. Ground-based rescue attempts had failed repeatedly due to the technical difficulty of the climbing routes. "Mr. Martinez, I'm going to dispatch a team immediately. Can you give me your exact location?" "We're at the Elk Creek campground, about 2 miles from the base of the North Face. The trail markers say we're at 9,800 feet elevation. I need you to understand something important. Do not attempt any rescue on your own. Eagles Peak is extremely dangerous, and we've lost people trying to help others. Stay where you are, keep trying to communicate with your son, and wait for our team. We'll be there as soon as possible." After hanging up, Patterson immediately contacted his team leader, Captain Sarah Chun. Chun had been with the rescue service for 15 years and had led more successful operations than anyone else in the department. If anyone could figure out how to reach someone trapped on Eagles Peak's north face, it would be her. "Sarah, we've got a 17-year-old trapped somewhere on Eagle's north face. Family heard him calling for help about an hour ago." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Chun knew Eagles Peak as well as anyone, and they both understood what they were dealing with. "Mike, you know what that mountain is like. We've declared it unsurvivable for standard rescue operations 3 times in the past 5 years. The last team that attempted a ground rescue on the North Face barely made it back alive themselves. I know, but we can't just leave a kid up there. The family is camping at Elk Creek. They're not climbers, just regular people on a camping trip. Chin sighed. All right, I'll call the team together. But we need to be realistic about what we're dealing with. The North Face has sections where the rock is nearly vertical for over 800 feet. If this kid fell into one of those crevices, there may not be anything we can do. Within an hour, the full rescue team had assembled at headquarters. Besides Patterson and Chun, the team included Dr. Lisa Rodriguez, their medical specialist, Tom Brennan, their technical climbing expert, and Jake Morrison, their communications specialist. Each member had years of experience in mountain rescue operations, but they all knew that Eagles Peak represented a challenge unlike anything they had faced before. Chin spread a topographical map of Eagles Peak across the table in their briefing room. The North Face was marked with red X's indicating previous accident locations and failed rescue attempts. Here's what we know, she began, pointing to the map. Carlos Martinez, 17 years old, went exploring alone early this morning from a family camping trip. The family heard him calling for help approximately 2 hours ago, with the sound coming from somewhere on the North Face. Dr. Rodriguez studied the map carefully. If he's been trapped for 2 hours and we're just hearing about it now, we're looking at potential hypothermia issues. October temperatures at that elevation drop below freezing after sunset. If he's injured and can't move to generate body heat, time is critical. Tom Brennan, their climbing specialist, shook his head as he examined the detailed elevation markers. The North Face has 3 major crevice systems where someone could potentially fall and become trapped. Each one presents different challenges, but they all have one thing in common. They're in sections of the mountain that have never been successfully climbed. Never been climbed, or never been climbed safely? Chin asked. Both. The rock composition changes dramatically about 600 feet up the North Face. The granite becomes fractured and unstable. Traditional climbing techniques don't work because you can't trust the rock to hold anchors or pitons. Free climbing is suicide because handholds can break away without warning. Jake Morrison, who had been quietly studying weather reports on his laptop, looked up with a grim expression. We've got another problem. Weather Service is calling for a storm system to move through the area starting tomorrow afternoon. High winds, potential snow at elevations above 12,000 feet. If we don't reach him today, we may not get another chance for several days. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. A 17-year-old boy trapped in near-freezing conditions couldn't survive several days without food, water, and proper shelter. Chin stood up and began pacing. All right. Let's think about this systematically. Helicopter rescue is out due to wind patterns around the North Face. Standard climbing approaches haven't worked in the past. What other options do we have? Patterson pulled out a folder containing reports from previous rescue attempts on Eagles Peak. I've been reviewing past operations. Every failed rescue attempt has tried to approach from the standard climbing routes. But there's something interesting here. He spread several photographs across the table, each showing different angles of the North Face. Look at these images from different seasons. Notice how the shadow patterns change. There are ledge systems and potential routes that are only visible under certain lighting conditions. Dr. Rodriguez leaned forward to examine the photographs more closely. What are you thinking, Mike? I'm thinking that maybe previous teams were approaching the problem the wrong way. Instead of trying to climb up to reach trapped individuals, what if we approached from above? Tom Brennan looked skeptical. The summit approach to Eagles Peak is a 12-hour climb under ideal conditions. By the time we reached the summit and attempted to rappel down the North Face, it could be too late. Not necessarily. Patterson continued, his excitement growing. What if we used the old mining roads? There are several abandoned mining operations from the 1920s that carved roads partway up the backside of the mountain. We could potentially drive four-wheel drive vehicles to within 2,000 feet of the summit, cutting hours off our approach time. Chin studied the topographical map more carefully. Those mining roads haven't been maintained in decades. They could be completely washed out or blocked by rock slides. It's a risk, Patterson admitted, but it might be our only chance. If those roads are still passable, we could reach a position where rappelling down the North Face becomes feasible. Jake Morrison was already pulling up satellite images on his laptop. I can get recent aerial photography of the mining road areas. Give me a few minutes to analyze the current conditions. While Morrison worked on analyzing the satellite imagery, the rest of the team continued planning. Dr. Rodriguez began assembling medical supplies appropriate for treating hypothermia and potential trauma injuries in extreme conditions. Tom Brennan started gathering specialized climbing equipment designed for technical rappelling operations. Found something interesting, Morrison announced, turning his laptop screen toward the group. The main mining road appears to be blocked by a major rockslide about 3 miles up, but there's a secondary road that looks potentially passable. It's more circuitous, but it might get us to within striking distance of the summit. Chun made a decision. All right, here's what we're going to do. Mike and Tom will take the technical climbing gear and attempt to reach Carlos via the mining road approach. Lisa, you'll coordinate medical support from the base camp and be ready to treat him when we bring him down. Jake, you'll maintain communications between all teams and coordinate with local authorities if we need additional support. What about helicopter standby? Dr. Rodriguez asked. I'll request a helicopter on standby at the regional airport, but given the wind conditions around Eagles Peak, we can't count on air support. This is going to be a ground operation. As the team prepared to leave, Patterson couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to attempt something that had never been successfully accomplished. The north face of Eagles Peak had defeated every previous rescue attempt, and they were essentially improvising their approach based on old mining roads that might not even exist anymore. But somewhere on that mountain, a 17-year-old boy was fighting for his life, and his family was counting on them to bring him home safely. Patterson had learned long ago that sometimes the impossible was just another word for something that hadn't been tried yet. The drive to Elk Creek Campground took 45 minutes through winding mountain roads. When they arrived, they found the Martinez family huddled around a campfire, their faces etched with worry and exhaustion. David Martinez immediately approached Chun as she stepped out of the rescue vehicle. Thank God you're here. We've been calling to Carlos every few minutes, and he's still responding, but his voice sounds weaker than it was 2 hours ago. Chun introduced herself and the team, then asked to hear Carlos's responses for herself. They walked to the edge of the campground where the terrain began rising toward Eagles Peak's north face. David Martinez cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted, Carlos, can you hear me? The rescue team is here. For a moment, there was only the sound of wind through the pine trees. Then, faintly, they heard a voice calling back from somewhere high above them. Dad, I'm here. I'm trapped in some kind of cave or crevice. I can't get out. The voice was definitely coming from high up on the mountain, but it was impossible to determine exactly where. The acoustic properties of the rock formations could make voices seem to come from multiple directions simultaneously. Chun turned to Tom Brennan. What do you think? Can you triangulate his position based on the sound? Brennan listened carefully as David Martinez called out again, and Carlos responded. He's definitely above the tree line, probably somewhere between 12,000 and 13,000 feet elevation. But the exact location could be anywhere along a half-mile stretch of the north face. Dr. Rodriguez approached the group with a concerned expression. I've been listening to his voice, and there are signs that worry me. His speech patterns suggest he may be experiencing early stages of hypothermia. His responses are getting slower, and his words are slightly slurred. The implications were clear to everyone. Carlos was running out of time. Chun made a quick decision. Mike, Tom, we're moving to the mining road approach immediately. Lisa, set up a medical station here at the campground. Jake, get communications established with headquarters and maintain contact with Carlos's family. As Patterson and Brennan loaded their climbing gear into a four-wheel drive vehicle, Chun had one final conversation with David Martinez. Mr. Martinez, I need you to understand that what we're attempting has never been successfully completed before. Eagles Peak's north face is considered one of the most dangerous rescue environments in this region. We're going to do everything possible to reach your son, but I can't promise you a successful outcome. David Martinez looked up at the imposing mountain face, then back at Chun. Captain, that's my boy up there. Whatever it takes, whatever the risks are, please just try. He's a good kid, and he deserves a chance. Chun nodded, understanding completely. She had children of her own, and she knew that no parent should have to face the possibility of losing a child to the mountains. As Patterson started the engine of their rescue vehicle, Chen climbed into the passenger seat and checked her equipment one final time. They were about to attempt something that experienced climbers had declared impossible, using routes that might not even exist anymore, to save a boy who might already be beyond help. But that was what mountain rescue was all about, attempting the impossible when someone's life hung in the balance. The vehicle pulled away from the campground, heading toward the unknown mining roads and whatever challenges awaited them on Eagle's Peak.